Let's go to a place where everything is made of blocks, where the only limit is your imagination.
This was the trailer that I, and maybe you watching, used to replay over and over on a website called Minecraft.net. I don't know why, but this used to fill me with this feeling of inspiration to go and create something great on my world. And even now, I go back to it once in a while just to remember that feeling. Minecraft is an extremely special game to so many people, whether it was their introduction to video games or something they only picked up over the past couple of years. It's safe to say that Minecraft has had a pretty huge impact on gaming culture as a whole. I mean, it had to, right? This thing is the best-selling video game of all time, and man, it's not even close. But even knowing this, it's still mind-boggling to see kids walking around wearing t-shirts of the game that I first played over a decade ago. What's even weirder is the fact that the game is probably even more significant now than it was during its big boom, because it has absolutely cemented itself in gaming culture as a bit of a cornerstone of video games. I mean, the game appeals to virtually every demographic. The hardcore gamers, which have a mode specifically for them, the speedrunners, who have managed to beat the game in under 8 minutes. I genuinely have no idea what I'm watching, Jesus Christ. The completionists, who might want to collect every achievement or item, but especially the casual gamers who just want to build, mine, or adventure in this magical world. And because of all this, the game has become an absolutely fantastic hub for all types of gamers to play together. Whether you're a Minecraft veteran, or new to the game, or maybe just a partner or even child of somebody that plays the game, it's a way to all connect, and a pretty damn good one at that. But there is one question about the game that's been floating around for most of its lifespan. Was the old game better? Since the game has changed so much since its earlier versions, there has been a lot of debate on whether those older versions were better due to the lack of certain features and their overall simplistic bliss, and that the so-called new Minecraft is overfilled with too much stuff to do and lacks that simplicity that the game once had. So today, I want to take a little look back on one of the most important games of not just my life, but millions of people's lives, through its development with the overall theme of how Minecraft lost its simplicity and moved towards a much different, but equally great, style of game. Just one block at a time. We start our journey in 2009, where Marcus Persson, aka Notch, worked as a game developer for King, the company that would later go on to destroy the bank accounts for middle-aged women with their release of Candy Crush. During his downtime, Notch would prototype his own games at home, usually with inspiration from other games. One of these games was called Ruby Dung, a base building game inspired by Dwarf Fortress in a more three-dimensional environment. Not a lot would come of Ruby Dung, as it was cancelled very early on, though not long after, Notch would gain more inspiration from a game called Infiniminer, and the codebase from Ruby Dung would go on to become what we now know as Minecraft. Now, before we go any further, I want to be clear that throughout this video, we're going to be focusing primarily on the Java edition of Minecraft, as that was the original version of the game, and the one that I've spent the majority of my time with. That being said though, I've played the game on both console and mobile as well, and a lot of what I'll be talking about can be applied to those. I'll also try and stay fairly concise when going through the updates because, well, how many hours have you got? The first phase of development is known as Pre-Classic, and initially went by the name of Cave Game. Man, so weird how that name didn't stick around. Obviously, this was a really early build of the game, with very little for you to actually do. Here we could place blocks with left click, and mine blocks with right click, but we couldn't choose what we were placing. If the block would have been a grass block there before, then you'd place a grass block, but everywhere else would be stone. We could respawn ourselves in a different place in this tiny map by pressing R, and we can also summon flailing Steves by pressing G. There are quite a few versions of the game during this pre-classic phase, with a few available to us on the launcher. We can see how the game was testing some of its foundations in this stage of development, but it wasn't until the next phase where we'd start to see the game shaping itself into something a little bit more recognisable. During the classic phase of Minecraft, we start to see a lot of additions to the game that would either become staples or lay the foundations for what the game would become. For starters, this was the phase that introduced a natural terrain which would generate with hills, lakes, and trees. Albeit basic compared to the current version of Minecraft, This was a massive improvement upon what we had before, which was, stone and dirt. There were, of course, still a lot of major things that Classic didn't yet have, such as an inventory or crafting, which I'd say is a pretty important part of the game today. Instead, we were confined to what looks a lot more like the creative mode that we have access to now, just with a much smaller variety of blocks. That being said though, the game was starting to take shape, and the world around us felt a lot more like, well, an actual world now. Of course, when I say world, I mean island, because even when you set the world to huge, you're only a couple of hundred blocks away from the world border. But on that island, we have a genuinely interesting world. The hills feel unique and give the game some character. The water was a nice feature to break things up. We have gravel and sand to add variety. And things like trees, ores, mushrooms and flowers just gave the world a bit more of that Minecraft charm. Now if only there was a way to destroy that charm. The classic phase of Minecraft was arguably one of the more important phases because we went from something extremely similar to the pre-classic versions to something that you could realistically call a video game. I mean, we have world generation with enough to feel interesting, but more importantly, we have the ability to create whatever we want to. A pretty damn vital part of what makes Minecraft enjoyable. If this final version was built upon just a little bit, maybe adding more block variety and the ability to fly, I could easily see this as being a fun little building game. But it seemed like there were bigger plans for the future. During this classic phase, there were some test versions of the game. One for multiplayer, which is pretty self-explanatory, but also another one for survival mode. The survival mode would include features such as a health system, damage and death, as well as zombies, skeletons, pigs, and arrows. All of these being things that we know all too well at this point. But at the time, this was a pretty big step for the game, which showed the potential of what was to come in the future. The community wanted to be able to play the game with the new features that were being added, and so we enter Indev, the third phase of development, short for in development. This was the first version of the game that you actually had to pay for. This money would presumably go towards helping fund the development of the game. But hey, I don't know what €5 was buying you in 2009 Sweden. I'm not an economist, I've been playing fucking Minecraft for weeks. Some of the features that would get added during Indev include crafting, thank god, an inventory, food to restore health, furnaces, torches, third-person view, item stacks, day and night cycles, dynamic lighting, and Beast Boy from Teen Titans. Wait, what? There were a few passive human mobs added during Indev, which were later removed, with a much different art style than we've seen before. They were primarily used for testing and placeholding purposes, with the Rana character representing you in your inventory. But it's pretty interesting to think that the game was experimenting with art styles, and what might potentially have been a very early idea of NPCs, even if they didn't stick around for that long. Another significant feature of Indev was the starting house, which would go through a few changes throughout the Indev phase, but would ultimately be removed during the next phase of the game. The starting house is considered to be the first structure added to the game, even if it generated where we spawned, and could have been really helpful while players adjusted to the more survival mode aspect of the game. However, as the game did progress more towards these survival aspects, the starting house would see more and more features stripped away, such as the chests full of items and blocks. While Indev added a lot of things that made the game feel much more like what we know Minecraft to be at its core nowadays, there was still one pretty massive feature missing from the game. A feature that would go on to bring us into the next phase of development, known as... Minecraft just wouldn't feel like Minecraft if we had to stay confined to such small worlds. Part of the joys of the current version of Minecraft comes with the exploration aspects of the game, or even just finding the perfect spot for your house. And so the code for the game was rewritten to allow for terrain to procedurally generate infinitely, or at least far enough away that nobody would realistically walk there. When you look at what Minecraft was becoming, this change was absolutely fantastic for freeing the game from such harsh limitations. After all, this is a sandbox game, and the bigger the sandbox, the better. We would of course see a lot of new features added yet again. More items to craft, 3D clouds, a better fluid system, better cave systems, more blocks, and decorative blocks like signs, ladders and doors, as well as things like minecarts, rails and dungeons. The game was honestly starting to feel fleshed out by this point. We had a lot to do, reason to explore the world, but importantly, we started seeing the potential for what we could create. With this selection of blocks and world generation, we did of course still have a long distance ahead of us, but man, this really was the starting point for being able to go and create those more complex builds, explore a vast open world, and go caving. That being said though, the game still felt a little primitive. Infdev's main purpose was, of course, to make the terrain generation infinite, and the next step in progression came with Minecraft's next phase. Minecraft would move on to its alpha phase very shortly after Notch began to work on the game full time, and because of this, the game started to see some very frequent updates. Bug fixes and tweaks could be done throughout the week to keep the game looking and feeling good, while the bigger and more substantial updates would often be seen during the Secret Friday updates, which were first introduced late into Infdev. Alpha introduced us to some pretty damn huge features in the game, like multiplayer survival mode, biomes, fishing, redstone, and the ability to sneak, along with a bunch of different blocks, items, and even new animals and mobs. This is also where we get introduced to the Nether, a hell-like biome filled with netherrack, zombie pigmen, and ghasts. It's worth noting that we did kinda see an early version of this back in Indev, but this time it was just a world theme option, where everything would look darker, more mobs would spawn, and lava would surround the world instead of water. But now we have an actual new realm to explore, as well as the overworld, with some pretty decent things to find. We could get netherrack, which was a useful building material, glowstone was a really cool looking light source, and soul sand, which exists, with the big drawback of it being pretty dangerous at times. I mean, there is just lava fucking everywhere, and if one of these guys decides to start firing at you, all of your progress could be lost. On top of this, the Nether gave you more of a reason for getting diamonds and obsidian other than it just being something for you to do. While you could get obsidian to build with if you're some sort of masochist, now you could use it to build a portal, giving you a brand new challenge later on in the game. Alpha was a pretty great phase for the game, and you could really tell that it was being worked on full time by this point, just in the sheer amount of stuff that was getting added. This was undoubtedly Minecraft, with the fundamentals in place by this point, and it was honestly a fun time. But by the end of Alpha, we have so many cool things to do, from playing around with redstone to make cool contraptions, adventuring in the Nether, making rail systems to link different bases together. Eggs are in the game now, that's pretty neat. And most importantly, we are starting to grow such a nice variety of blocks and decorations that building things is so much more rewarding due to how cool everything can look. Beta was the final development phase before full release of the game, and just like Alpha, we get to see some more huge changes to the game. Throughout Beta, we would see all sorts of things added like achievements, a creative mode similar to classic Minecraft, weather effects like rain and snow, new mobs, the hunger system, beds, maps, new blocks, new redstone mechanisms, improved graphical effects, and lighting mechanics, and stackable food among other things, all packaged with the new logo and launcher for the game. This phase had a lot of substantial updates, which made the early versions of Beta feel entirely different from the final version, Beta 1.8. These versions of the game were apparently so different, in fact, that many players to this day don't really enjoy playing the game beyond Beta 1.7.3, because 1.8 introduced a lot of pretty controversial changes to the game. 1.8, also known as the Adventure Update, focused heavily on combat, exploration, and adventure. Part 1 would be seen during the final version of Alpha, whereas Part 2 would come during the full release of the game. The reason it was so controversial was because of how it changed so many different gameplay elements, and the terrain. Combat was overhauled so that bows need to charge, swords could parry with right click, and you could land critical hits. Biomes were changed, and for the most part, this made them kind of flat and samey, which honestly took a lot of the character away from the game. But maybe most importantly, the hunger mechanic completely changed how players would approach the game for reasons we'll get into shortly. A lot of people consider Beta 1.7.3 and everything before it to be labelled as Old Minecraft, with Beta 1.8 and everything after it being New Minecraft. And for the sake of the video, that's what we'll be calling it. Regardless of how people feel about the direction that Minecraft started to take during Beta, it's pretty clear that a lot of substantial things got added during this time, which would go on to help pave the way for how the game would look when it finally did release. The full release of Minecraft in 2011 was simply labelled as version 1.0.0, where the game was finally given an ending, with the end. From the people that brought you Cave Game. Good job, guys. The end gives the player something to work towards, and if you're not really into the creative aspect of the game, this makes it so much more playable, and that is fantastic. But to be honest, a lot of players like me rarely care too much about getting there. Sure, it's a fun thing to do, and the Ender Dragon feels pretty great to defeat, but I kinda like to just build things. From here, the game would continue to make substantial changes and develop it into what we know now. And a lot of those changes from 1.4.2 and onwards would come in these huge updates with actual names instead of different numbered versions. For example, the Combat Update, the Aquatic Update, Village and Pillage, Caves and Cliffs, the Nether Update, and most recently, the Trails and Tales Update. All of these big updates would either add a load of new things, generally focusing on one area of the game, or completely overhaul features to make them feel a little bit more modern. Places like the Nether or the ocean biomes went from being a bit outdated and bland to more interesting and filled with new things to do. And in the current version of Minecraft, there is very little that feels like it's in need of a revamp. Minecraft now has a ridiculous amount of blocks. The terrain is a lot more fun than Beta 1.8, but not quite as charismatic as 1.7.3. And there are so many different paths that you can go down while playing, with multiple bosses, and a variety of goals to go for. The game now feels miles different from when it was first properly released with version 1.0, but that release version, and Beta 1.8, honestly started to feel like a new way to play the game compared to versions before it. It was here where the game began to become much more progression based, and started to stray away from that sandbox feeling just a little bit. The hunger mechanic changed how you would approach the game because you would no longer have to worry about taking damage. Meanwhile, keeping the hunger bar high was a constant worry, and honestly, when you get past the novelty of having the hunger mechanic, it's just a fucking annoyance. Like, yeah, cool, I have a farm now. Not because I want to, but because I can't regenerate my health without it. As the game continued down this progression-based path, we would see mining become much more dangerous and complex, forcing you to get at least iron armor and equipment before caving in the deep dark most of the time. Combat got overhauled, making that an entire element on its own, with a bunch of requirements from resources to enchantments, and adventuring feels a lot less about looking for a cool thing, and more about finding rare resources and structures. The game started to go down a more linear path than we'd ever seen it before. Go punch tree, go get stone, make a house if you want, go get iron, start a big farm to get rid of hunger issues, start crafting better gear so that you can find diamonds, make diamond gear and enchant it, go to the nether, go to the end, win. And this isn't really helped with the guide elements that the game sort of forces on us. As soon as we spawn in, it wants us to start on that path of progression, rather than just letting us play the game how we want to play. This sounds pretty harsh on the current version of the game, and honestly, I don't mean for it to be. The latest version of the game is absolutely fantastic to play. The world feels so full and interesting. There are a ridiculous amount of blocks to find and build with. It still has that infinite replayability, whether you want to start a new world or keep playing the same one for years, and every element of the game feels so unique from one another that you can just find your favourite parts of Minecraft and stick to them if you want. But the way the game has been designed in more recent years is definitely with some sort of goal in mind for its players. Things to conquer, resources to upgrade your gear with, and ways to streamline how you play the game. For a lot of players, that's great, but for others, it's not the same experience. The idea of simplicity can hold both positive and negative connotations. On one hand, if something is overly simple, it can get boring, stale, repetitive, synonyms. But on the other hand, simplicity can be something that a game uses to its advantage. And the older versions of the game really leaned into that. There wasn't too much going on at once, you were left to your own devices a lot of the time, and everything felt less complicated. The more recent versions of the game have definitely left a lot of that simplistic feeling behind and gone with a different approach. From the moment you spawn into the world, there is so much going on around you, and after all of the updates, every single aspect of the game feels like its own journey. And all of this is amazing in its own right, but it's definitely not that simple anymore. The new Nether is such an awesome place to go and visit and presents you with a new challenge, rare minerals to find, and opportunities, but man, there is so much you have to figure out before attempting it. Mining trips went from strip mines and staircases to bedrock, to an actual adventure, filled with these beautiful, yet dangerous caves, and the Warden, which adds so many new levels to the game, while also kind of forcing you to go on these grand adventures, just for a bit of awe. New Minecraft is definitely not bad whatsoever. Most people would agree that overall it's a much better experience. But there is a reason that people still hold on to their 1.7.3 worlds, and refuse to go any further with them. Beta 1.8 was seen as this cutoff point for when the game started to become much more progression based, and in turn a lot less simple to play through. Pre-Beta 1.8, all the progress in the game came from what you had decided to create, and if that happened to be something like a big city with a lot going on, then each building is one step closer in that goal you've set. But that's just the thing, it was entirely what you wanted to progress, rather than some predetermined thing. Beta 1.8 and the full release of the game was where we started to see the game try and push players in a certain direction. There was a higher emphasis on having sustainable food sources, so that was something you kinda had to make. Changes to movement and combat encouraged a much faster style of gameplay, where half the time it was just easier to sprint past enemies instead of dealing with them. Of course, the terrain felt a lot less interesting and varied, which only kinda highlighted that Minecraft was becoming a bit of a different game. And when you look at the game now, having diamond, or even netherite gear, is seen as more of a standard thing that you just need to go and get, because the game has now been designed around players gathering that stuff pretty early on. Mojang know that a pretty decent chunk of players will have things like villager halls to streamline the process of progressing to get the best gear. So yeah, why wouldn't they design the game around that fact? And so a lot of the players do just go back to their quiet, goalless, beta 1.7.3, and usually get a lot more fun out of it because their progress is defined by what they do. There are so many great examples of people showing off their 1.7.3 worlds on YouTube, which highlights just how differently the game used to play. There were less things to think about. Your primary goal would be to create this perfect world in your image, and with the current version of Minecraft, that just feels like a much bigger task because of how many things you need to think about and take care of. Suddenly, you're not just getting materials and building your structures, you're gathering better and better gear so that you can go and venture into a dangerous area, while also making some sort of auto farm or manually tending to it. And by the time it actually comes to building what you want to build, you might start to feel that burnout. This isn't some kind of sudden change. 1.7.3 is just a well-known version of the game that people deem as being this golden version of Minecraft. Realistically, this is just how the game has evolved over time, and each update has fixed an issue that the game has been struggling with to make the experience much more fun and rewarding to play for the majority of players. At its heart, Minecraft is a sandbox where you can do whatever you want to do, go wherever you want to go, and importantly, build whatever you want to build. The idea of adding so many goals and purposes for the player does start to shake up that feeling of freedom that the game has. Of course, you can still do, go and build whatever you want to, but now you have a bunch of actual reasons for doing things. And a lot of these goals both give you much more to do with the game, and really help to define the different paths of gameplay you might choose to go down. However, it also makes certain elements of the game much more linear. If you want to do certain things or get certain items, then you will often have to follow the set path to progress to that point. This is something that we've seen much more of as new things get added to the game. Diamond armor has always been a pretty flashy thing to have, but now it's basically a necessity for you if you want to solo some of the game bosses. You're not just getting it because you want to, but because you have to. From there, it's mainly the enchantment and netherite upgrades that have become the flashy optional parts. One thing that I genuinely do just hate about new Minecraft are these tutorial pop-ups. Not only are they annoying and piss useless for 99% of players, they just needlessly start forcing you to play the game the way it wants you to play, instead of letting you figure things out by yourself, or God forbid, use your free will to decide what you do. Finding your own purpose while playing the game is entirely different than being given a reason to complete certain tasks, and I think that's one of the main differences between old and new Minecraft. Neither of these are bad in any way, they're just different ways to play the game. Personally, I much prefer creating my own purpose when I start a world, but half of my friends that play the game seem to really love having all these challenges to overcome, and that's where a lot of the beauty of Minecraft comes in. Because, while the game has absolutely started to become much more progression and objective based, the ability to do whatever we want is still there. It's just a little different now. A game can't stagnate for too long, and since Minecraft has been out for a long time now, the game has had to innovate, change, and overhaul a lot of different things. This is very much a good thing, and maybe something that it should be doing more of. A lot of the updates in the past few years have seemed to be a little underwhelming for players, considering how long they take to come out at times. This could well be because the players are in a bit of a more completionist mindset, and need Mojang to start giving them new content and things to overcome. Which makes a lot of sense given that the game is much less focused on creating your own content, and has started to become more about playing through the content that is already in the world. It's a cycle that will go on, until the game stops getting updates. But without changing anything at all, the game would definitely grow stale for the majority of its player base. Even if it's a sandbox game that lets you do anything you'd like to, there still needs to be some reasons to keep coming back to the game. Some great ways that Mojang could update the game that doesn't overcomplicate things or contribute to this progression-based, completionist playstyle would be with updates that give you a lot of random, but cool, stuff to play around with. An amazing one could be implementing a new dimension similar to the Aether mod, but making sure that the sole reason for going there isn't just for some rare item that makes you stronger, but instead is for unique blocks and decorative items, and generally just being a cool place to explore. This could let the game expand massively, giving the players more stuff to do and more blocks to build with, without it being just another step in the path to beating the game. While the game has evolved a lot, it's great that the launcher allows us to play the older versions of the game. There is a thriving community of people playing versions like 1.7.3 exclusively, and it's almost like going through a time machine when browsing those dedicated forums and seeing people post their new builds. If you've had a great time with an older version of the game, you can just boot it up and play it, meaning that any new updates that could change something that you really love about the game aren't going to actually ruin the game for you. You will always have the ability to go back and play it how you want to play it. If you preferred the game back when it was more simple, then more power to you. And if you just enjoy the new stuff that has been added as time goes on, well, hop in, because I can't see them stopping anytime soon. Mods have been a part of Minecraft for practically its entire lifespan. They have always been an amazing way to add things to the game, or in some cases, they can be used to completely change the point of the game. A pretty great example being Tekkit, a mod that adds all sorts of different industrial and magical elements to the game, and because of their amazing pipes and sorting systems, a lot of the time, you'll end up making some sort of factory looking build while playing. Pixelmon takes Minecraft and says, hey, fuck this, let's make it Nintendo, and suddenly you're playing through an open world Pokemon game, one that actually runs properly for a change, and you'll tend to find yourself neglecting a lot of Minecraft's elements, instead focusing on leveling up your party. I feel that modern Minecraft is less reliant on mods to shake things up, because the game already has so much going on that you will always have new things to do, and new ways to play the game. For old Minecraft, they were a great way to appease the players who did want something more, or just a way to shake up the game. While I don't have too much to say about mods, I thought they deserve a bit of a mention, because they honestly shaped the game, and were a pretty important part of playing Minecraft. I mean, some mods ended up getting thrown into the game, and the same goes really for adventure maps, and even texture packs to a degree. Maps like Skyblock and Survival Island specifically were pretty great ways to shake up a playthrough of the game, and some maps were even used to tell entire stories. Texture packs are mainly just to give the game a new look. Maybe this could be to fit in with the style of build you're making, or just to give your eyes something different to look at. We all see Minecraft in our own unique ways, based on our own personal experiences. For me, a lot of it relates to certain people that I've played with over the years, content creators that I've watched, and certain worlds that I spent a lot of time on. I can't quite remember when, but I first got into the game sometime around 2011. I couldn't play it at first because, well, I was too young to have any sort of card and relied on my parents. So a lot of my first memories of the game were watching YouTubers play it. The first series that I properly got into was one that I can't quite remember the name of, and haven't been able to find. But I have these vivid memories of two guys playing and making a box-like house on top of a hill. The render distance wasn't particularly high, so there was a lot of mist. They wanted another floor to their house, so they made this sort of tube thing on top of it with a ladder, which led to another box, which actually hit the build height limit. After that, I eventually found the Oxcast's Minecraft series, and started watching through that. This would of course turn into the grand adventure called Shadow of Israfel, filled with dozens of NPCs, some breathtaking cities and builds for the time, and probably some of the funniest commentary I've ever watched. When I managed to buy the game, I immediately joined a server that my friend had told me about, which I only knew as Joe's server. Who the fuck Joe was, I have no idea. But that memory of ambitiously building my first house entirely out of bricks is a pretty great one. Secondary school was where I met a load of other people that were into Minecraft. By then, the game was pretty massive, and I ended up bonding with one of my closest friends to this day over common interests like Minecraft. While I don't have them anymore, and I've played the game across 2 laptops and 2 PCs by this point, I still remember a lot of my worlds and bases pretty vividly. One in particular being a nice but fairly standard oak plank house in the forest. It had a couple of different rooms and a mineshaft going down to bedrock. I remember spending literal hours searching for some cows to bring home so I could farm some leather for bookshelves for my new enchanting table. At the time it was really annoying. Looking back, it's such a fond memory. Something that blew my mind and one of my favourite things to do used to be Spleef, which was this competitive game where you had to knock the snow underneath your enemy. It's a bit primitive now compared to what we have, but man, at the time, this was so cool. I also remember being deathly scared of Herobrine and Israfel from the Oxyar series being in my world. Maybe it's just the nostalgia, but I don't think the current version of the game quite captures that isolated feeling that the game used to have, which made the idea of another person stalking you so scary. And even to this day, Minecraft acts as a hub for multiple friend groups. Servers have brought me closer to people, helped me stay in contact with people, and generally avoid loneliness while the world was shutting down outside. It doesn't really matter what version of the game you like best, or whether you enjoy the simplistic bliss of the old Minecraft more than the current version of the game, which has way more for you to do, at the cost of losing a little bit of that simplicity. While those things can be important for how we want to play the game now, what's really important is what sort of memories we can make with the game on whatever version we enjoy best.
Minecraft is one of my favorite video games of all time, and I grew up with it as a constant throughout my life. I sunk countless hours into various multiplayer minigames, modded servers with friends, and single-player worlds building whatever I dreamt up. I even went to Minecon one year, back when that was a thing, but my absolute favorite memories with this game were made at the height of the PvP era in 2016. I cannot even begin to tell you how many hours of my life I spent playing survival games, grinding ranked PvP ladders, and dying in ultra hardcore. When I finally won my first UHC game, I felt a euphoria that no video game has ever replicated since. And for that reason, I'll carry the memories I made in Minecraft with me for the rest of my life.
My favourite version of Minecraft would have to be 1.8. I've always known it as the one that gave us Prismarine. Before knowing the actual water temple existed, how massive that was, on a creative server I built my own temple pyramid water feature, and I was so proud of it. I thought it was so cool. And my favourite memory of the game would be from around that time as well. On one of those servers, I made a group of friends, and one of them is still one of my closest friends to this day. She's an amazing person that I know purely thanks to Minecraft.
When it comes to Minecraft and its many versions that have been released over the years, I found myself really absorbed into the original Xbox 360 release of version of the game. It was mainly because it was the first time I could actually play Minecraft, as my first time playing it was on a Windows Vista E-Machines computer running at about 5 frames per second, so it wasn't really the most enjoyable experience. Aside from that though, the Xbox 360 version of Minecraft played a huge part in me making friends that I had on Xbox. It was the game that my friends and I all had in common. I remember sitting in an Xbox Live party as we would boot up a new world to go and adventure for hours, and it was some of my favorite memories as a kid. I look back on those times I shared with my friends then quite fondly.
Minecraft is a genuine masterpiece, and I don't say that lightly. The game has grown from what was just this tech demo, inspired by multiple different games, into not only its own original game, but a fucking great one at that. Everything from the blocks that have been added over the years, to the big overhaul updates, to the creative freedom, to the social aspect of the game, honestly makes it timeless. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this game is still relevant in another 10 years, maybe even more relevant than today. Minecraft has lost that simplistic nature that it used to have as time has gone on, and while you could still argue that there are a lot of elements of the game that scream simplicity, as a whole, it's moved past that, and onwards to, honestly, bigger and better things. I think what is really great is that we have all sorts of different versions to play on through the launcher. If you prefer old Minecraft, you have it right there, unless you're a big fan of Indev, I guess. If you prefer new Minecraft, you have it right there. If you enjoy the classic versions of the game, you have it right there. If you prefer the pre-classic version, cool, I guess. The old and new versions of the game offer so many different positives and negatives that no matter what version somebody says they like the most, I'd believe them. The game has grown to the point of it being more than just a game. but this global phenomenon that's connected people around the world, formed communities within it, and helped to mould an entire generation of gamers by this point. The infinite replayability, the versatility in worlds, the immense amount of items, blocks, and biomes, but also how easy it is to pick up and play, are some of the key reasons for its success, and is partly why the game has shifted from being a simplistic sandbox to a slightly more linear sandbox with so much more to do. So, come with me and let's go to a place where everything is made of blocks. Where the only limit is the version you're playing on. Let's go wherever you want to go. Climb the old terrain. Adventure down to the deep dark caves. Build the world of your dreams. New or old, simple or complex. Because this is the most significant sandbox you'll ever step foot in.